If this were a political science class, today's lesson wouldn't be about personalities. It would be about power, institutions, and incentives. Today happens to be the 114th birthday of the ANC, a liberation movement that became a governing party and now governs in a coalition after losing its majority for the first time in our last election. And later this year, and possibly earlier next year, we South Africans head into local government elections where democracy is tested not by speeches, but by water, electricity, and roads. So instead of reacting to headlines, today we're doing something different. We're going to ask, what phase of democracy are we actually in? What does it mean when a dominant party weakens? What changes when coalitions replace majorities? And what should citizens be watching, not emotionally, but analytically, as we head into 2026? This isn't about nostalgia, it's not about outrage. It's about becoming clear-eyed about how power works in South Africa and what that demands of all of us. Class is in session with Dr. Levy Ndou from the Tshwane University of Technology. So, Dr. Ndou, political science teaches us that liberation movements don't govern forever, right? They reform, they fragment, or they get hollowed out. Today is the 114th birthday of the ANC, and looking at the trajectory that they are on, where do you place the ANC in this milieu of how liberation movements become or change?
I think the first thing that we need to acknowledge is that the ANC is the oldest liberation movement in the continent today. It therefore tells you that when people say liberation movement will change, they'll transform, they'll take different forms, that could be the direction that the ANC will be taking. But what we need to acknowledge is that it is the oldest liberation movement that we still have, and they're celebrating 114 years of existence. And that tells you that it is not just a journey that should be celebrated ordinarily. There should be a history behind the celebration. What is it that the ANC stood for in the past? What is it that the ANC is known for? What is the ANC today? And what is the ANC in the future? And I think it's important to note that it was formed to unite South Africans. It was formed to ensure that the injustices are fought against. It was established to ensure that citizens have got rights. And moving fast forward, the ANC has all the reasons to celebrate. One, its age, 114. Two, the contribution that the ANC has made in bringing about freedom, democracy, and ensuring that, of course, the rights that people talk about have them and they actually celebrate such rights.
Do you think that this liberation memory and identity is still able to mobilize voters, looking at how dismally they performed in the last election and the number of people not showing up at the ballot box? Do you think that this identity and memory, liberation memory, is still able to mobilize voters?
We cannot erase what has happened in the past. That is the history that is there, and that is what the ANC has done. But I think to answer your question, there are areas that we need to look at. The first area that we need to look at is that 30 years of democracy, when people go to vote and they have the ANC and other political parties, you have got a mixed set of minds. People vote on the basis of what the ANC has done. That's what some people do. Some people vote because other political parties are able to identify the mistakes and the challenges that are there when the ANC is in government. and then they get convinced to say, maybe there could be a better alternative than the ANC.
So,
So even when we move towards elections and campaigning, what the ANC says is totally different from what other political parties are saying, because the ANC will talk about its history, they will talk about their achievements whilst they are in government, whilst other political parties would only be focusing on the mistakes of the ANC. And that is the big difference that is there. But
so do
in
you think,
celebrating,
yeah, in
but in
celebrating?
celebrating their birthday on the backdrop of the poor performance in the general elections, it should be a moment of reflection. It should be a moment of identifying where they did not do right and make an attempt to address where they did not do well, because that is the basis in which people will vote for the ANC.
So you think that the voters are not necessarily rejecting the history of the ANC, but rather their performance is what they are responding to by not showing up for them?
When they are busy preparing for the celebration in the Northwest, they are going to a province that has got a lot of dysfunctional municipalities. And that will tell you that there are a number of people who are not happy with service delivery in the Northwest. For the ANC to become relevant and to be voted again, they should be able to talk to those challenges and, of course, provide ways and means in which they are going to address such challenges. Because if they don't do that, as I've indicated earlier, other political parties are going to capitalize on the poor service delivery, poor governance, and the challenges that ordinary citizens face in the Northwest Province.
So, I think in the classroom of political science, we talk about it, that the test of democracy actually lives in local municipality. And now that we have a national government that is a government, a coalition government, as it were, and in the last administration, we did see some in some of the bigger metros, some kind of coalitions beginning to form, but also not holding. What do you think voters should read into these kind of service delivery breakdowns? Is there a misalignment between ideology and administration in your view?
There is a lot of that. I think what we need to focus on now is that when the dynamics are changing and you no longer have one party that is in charge of government, it therefore talks to a mix of political programs. And that would also be informed by how they argue amongst themselves in government and how other factors fit into the political programs. For an example, you would have different political parties with their own ideologies and their own programs, but they also have to look at the budget that could be there in government, but also look at the capacity of the people that they've employed to be able to execute what they actually have as their own program. So it's a mixture. So you can have very good policies, but if you do not have right people in the administration to ensure that they actualize and make sure that such policies are implemented, then there is no proper mix between the politicians and the administration. And what, therefore, that will create a situation where ordinary citizens will always say that politicians don't tell the truth because they would always promise them certain things, but administratively, such cannot be implemented.
So what do you think is the biggest misunderstanding that South Africans have about this moment in time? Whether it is the coalitions, whether it is service delivery at local level, and a declining liberation movement in the ANC as we see it today. What do you think the biggest misunderstanding that South Africans have about this moment in history?
It's a misunderstanding of the age of our democracy the misunderstanding of citizens' priorities, and simple political education. And I'll tell you why. 30 years into democracy, there are a lot of things, policy-wise, that we have been able to achieve under the leadership of the ANC. And the unfortunate part is that whilst we've got achievements, we also have got areas where we are not happy with how government was doing certain things. Another area that you need to look at is that coalitions that have taken place in South Africa, instead of being beneficial to citizens, they've been more disruptive, and we are unable to see the benefits of political parties being able to work together. Another important aspect will be the level of apathy amongst the citizens of South Africa, being able to take responsibility about the opportunities granted to us by democracy, and we seem only to be prepared to leave everything to politicians, and that creates very serious problems to our own people. And my view is that it will be very, very important to have a real look at how government is organized, especially where there are coalitions, so that it should work better for the ordinary citizens.
So, if democracy, then, as you say, ultimately is a shared responsibility between the citizens and government, what does this phase of our democracy demand of us as citizens beyond just showing up at the ballot and voting every 5 years?
We require a lot of basics in terms of understanding how government works, systems and processes of government, because that is what will inform our own participation in government activities. We need to know the line between politicians and administrators. We need also to know what is it that politicians can do and what is it that administrators can do. But more importantly, it's necessary for citizens to be taken along in everything that government is doing. And that is why in the Constitution, there's an emphasis of citizens' involvement in the activities of government, so that government should always be able to take citizens along. They'll be able to know and understand what is actually happening within government cycles.
So before I let you go, if you were to say what the signals are, what we as citizens should be watching out for, in your view, is South Africa currently renewing democratically, or is it decaying democratically? Are we in a growth phase, or are we in a dying phase?
I think democratically, South Africa is doing very, very well. We are maturing. We are having political parties, and indeed, leaders of political parties who appears to understand what is supposed to be done. The only challenge, in my view, that appears to be primary is that we have got a lot of people who associate democracy, rights, and freedom with disruptions. And that is the major challenge. And if we are able to embrace democracy so that it works for all of us, I see ourselves being on the right track.
We've got over 500 parties registered with the IEC, and going into the local elections, what do you think this means for voters? Do smaller parties fragment power, or do they offer an opportunity really to get things working in having more voices and more accountability being across the party lines?
Having over 500 political parties should be seen as a positive of democracy, that people understand that for them to make a difference, there's need to participate, and then they get to power. Obviously, when you have got so many political parties, they take or they feed from bigger political parties, and that weakens the bigger political parties, if smaller parties would therefore be able to get support. It is good for democracy. It has got its advantages and also its disadvantages.
It's messy though. When we look at, we've got 14 parties at national level and all sorts of smaller parties, and some you don't even know who they are in some of these
Mm.
municipalities. It looks messy. Can it mature into something that can benefit the citizens?
We need to know the reasons why we're having so many political parties. We need to examine whether that works for us or work in our favor or do not work for us. We also need to check whether having so many parties were able to become beneficiaries at the end of the day or it is disruptive. But what we've learned with our methods is that instead of dealing with service delivery, the focus is on managing coalitions or party relations at the expense of service delivery. And that is an area, in my view, that politicians are supposed to look at it, deal with it, and at the end of the day, develop reforms that must address the challenges that we face with coalitions, specifically in the metros.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for all of your insights and your input. And I really would have liked to ask you one more question about the NPA, but maybe we must leave it here for now because I do know that you've got a time pressure. Thank you so much for giving us your time and giving us all these wonderful insights.
You're always welcome. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you.